Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're digging into something pretty fascinating from history, what I'm calling a perfect pairing. We've got a 19th century hymn and, a forgotten Sunday from the old church calendar.
All right, let's jump right into this little liturgical mystery. You've got this hymn, right, from the 1800s, and then you have this Sunday called Septuagesima. Yeah, I know, most people have never even heard of it. And on the surface, they seem totally unrelated. But when you put them together, wow.
First piece of the puzzle, the hymn itself. And right off the bat, something jumps out at you. This is not a song of victory, It's not a triumphant anthem. It comes straight from the author, Frances Ridley Havergal. Now, she was a really important figure in the 19th century Anglican Church, and she was shaped by this really powerful idea that salvation is so much more than just being forgiven. For her, it was about this deep personal healing of a soul that's been wounded by sin. And the central metaphor here, it's just so powerful. Illness, a sickness that needs a divine doctor. So when the singer asks to be healed, it's not a small thing. It's a plea for total spiritual restoration. It's drawing on that ancient image of Christ as the ultimate physician of souls. And you gotta understand, this isn't about some quick, one-time fix. When we think about faith, our minds usually jump to the big stuff, right? The major celebrations, the huge moments. But what about the in-between times? The quiet moments of preparation or even doubt? Well, today, we're going to look at a hymn that was made specifically for a season that comes before the beginning. Let's dive in.
It sounds like Before we get to the intense 40 days of Lent, there's this kind of spiritual warm-up. It's a chance to get your head in the game, for the work that's ahead.
And this period has a name, Septuagesima. The best way to think about it is like taking a deep, calming breath before you run a marathon. The marathon in this case being Lent. So it's not about jumping straight into intense discipline. Not yet. It's more about looking inward and just honestly facing our own limits and acknowledging our need for grace. Okay, so if that's what this season is, what does it actually ask us to do? Well, it asks for something that can be, believe it or not, really, really hard. It asks us to just quietly acknowledge our own frailty. And let's be super clear here. This isn't about punishment or beating yourself up. Not at all. It's simply an honest assessment. It's about acknowledging our weakness, recognizing the absolute limits of our own willpower, and really understanding our deep dependence on divine grace. So the preparation here comes from reflection, not from penance.
So listen to this line, "The faint, the weak, on thee may lean." Wow, it's both a confession and a plea, isn't it? It's admitting weakness, but in the very same breath, it's pointing to a source of incredible strength. And that idea, that word leaning, that's really at the heart of what we're talking about today.
So where does that powerful line come from? It's from a hymn called O Holy Savior, Friend Unseen. And here's the thing, it was written by someone who knew all about frailty. Not as some abstract theological concept, but as something she lived with every single day.
Her name is Charlotte Elliott. Now, you might actually know her from her most famous hymn, Just As I Am. What's so incredible about her story is that for most of her life, she was an invalid. She dealt with constant, persistent poor health. So when she wrote about weakness, trust me, she wasn't just gave her this incredibly deep insight into grace, not just sheer willpower. Her hymns, they came from a place of real, raw, lived experience. And that experience leads us right to the core message of her hymn. It's this powerful idea that redefines what strength even is. It's not about our own power, our own ability. It's about our willingness to just lean on that unseen companion. And here's the really crucial part. The hymn paints this picture of Christ as a real, present companion who you can't see. This is a faith that doesn't need constant emotional highs. It's not looking for physical proof. It's a relationship that's built on just quiet trust. A faith that keeps going, even when, and maybe especially when, you don't feel a thing. So you can kind of picture two triumphs. It's demanding, and it really relies on having those big, powerful feelings. But what this hymn champions is something different. It's a faith of trust, one that's about quiet endurance, about leaning instead of demanding, and about sticking with it even when you feel totally numb. It's arguably a much more mature, and for a lot of us, a much more realistic way to look at the spiritual. The hymn lays out a pretty simple but really powerful path. First, you just admit your own weakness, acknowledge it. Second, you make an active choice to lean on that unseen strength. And third, it's through that very active leaning that you find endurance. You start to discover that real spiritual growth, holiness even, it grows out of reliance, not just from gritting your teeth and trying harder on your own. All right, put it all together and see why these two are just a perfect spiritual match. It's almost like a conversation. The season of Septuagesima asks these really tough questions, right? Like, what do I do when I know I'm not enough? Or how am I supposed to have faith when I don't feel any assurance at all? And for every single one of those, we trust. We hope for quiet, steady companionship, not a big show. You see, the season itself kind of rips the Band-Aid off and exposes this really humbling truth about us, and that can feel unsettling. But what Charlotte Elliott's hymn does is give us the language, the posture, the framework to face that truth and not fall into despair. I mean, what can a hymn that's almost 200 years old, written for a season most of us have never even heard of, possibly have to say to us today? Well, the message is absolutely timeless, and it's this: value endurance over spectacle. This hymn is calling us to a different kind of faith, one that's humble instead of confident and boastful, one that's enduring, not just a roller coaster of dramatic highs, a faith that is trusting instead of constantly demanding proof. And honestly, in our world today, which pretty much worships the loud, the big, and the spectacular, this idea of quiet strength it's pretty radical. And at the end of the day, that's the promise, isn't it? The hymn doesn't promise you'll always feel on top of the world. It doesn't promise dramatic, movie-like spirit. Is that in your weakness, that's where you'll find a faithful companion who never, ever departs.
So that leaves us with a final question, one to really think about. Whether we call it Septuagesima or just a really tough Tuesday, we all have those seasons of weakness. We all have moments where we feel like we've got nothing left. So the question is, in those moments, when our own strength is complete,
Have you ever heard a song that just seemed totally out of place for the moment? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at a beloved hymn that's absolutely overflowing with sweetness and joy, but it's often sung during a fascinating contrast, right? It's a real head-scratcher, unless you're deep into the logic of the church calendar. It's all about how this incredibly joyful hymn finds a perfect home in a season of really solemn preparation. Okay, so on the one hand, you've got this beautiful hymn, Jesu, the very thought of thee. The key words here often sung in, Septuagesima, and the key words there, sobriety, self-examination, and a real look at our own human frailty. See the contrast? So yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Why the mismatch? I mean, it seems completely counterintuitive. But as we're about to find out, there is some profound spiritual wisdom going on here. This is no accident, it's actress mood of the hymn. We need to explore its theology, because this isn't just some happy little song. It's a song about the very source of all happiness.
Now, the hymn itself, it actually comes from the 12th century Cistercian monastic tradition. And it's pointing to a real spiritual experience, not just some abstract idea. And what this hymn is really expressing is this powerful concept called holy longing. It's the idea that deep down in every single one of us, there's this profound, restless desire for God, a desire that, no fleeting earthly pleasure can ever really satisfy.
And this is not a new idea by any stretch. It plugs right into one of the most famous lines in all of Christian thought, from St. Augustine. He just perfectly nailed this feeling of holy longing, this restlessness that we all have that only finds its peace in God.
So, here's the crucial point. This hymn is making a really bold claim. It's saying Christ is the true fulfillment of all human desire. It draws a line between temporary fun and lasting joy, and it expresses this with a really reverent, deep affection, not just some wild, unchecked emotionalism. Okay, so we've got a handle on the hymn. Now let's look at the other half of our puzzle, this season with the kind of funny name Septuagesima. What exactly is it, and what's it for? Septuagesima Sunday is the official start of a season people call pre-Lent. The best way to think about it is like it's the on-ramp for the highway of Lent. It gives you a few weeks to get your head in the game before the really intense spiritual work begins. These of Christmas and Epiphany, and turning towards a more honest, sober look at ourselves. It's a time to ask, okay, where am I, really? What do I truly love? What do I put my trust in? It's all about getting the soul ready for what's next. And right here, this is where it all clicks. This is where the sweet hymn and the sober season come together in this moment of just perfect spiritual logic. This slide just lays out the logic so perfectly. Step 1, the season of Septuagesima gets us to ask a tough question. What am I really living for? Then, step 2, the hymn comes in and gives us the answer. Christ is the only desire that's truly worth it. And that leads to step 3, that answer becomes our motivation, the reason we're willing to do the hard work of Lent. And this changes absolutely everything. The hard work of Lent, the fasting, the extra prayer, all of it, it's no longer just some duty we have to slog through. It gets transformed into a loving response to a beautiful invitation. This quote just gets right to the heart of it. The hymn reminds us that we're doing all this spiritual work not because we're afraid of being punished, but because we are found wisdom. The Church puts this beautiful, sweet reminder of God's grace and love before it asks for our hard work. It shows us the finish line before we even start the race. It's a powerful reminder that it's devotion that fuels our effort, not the other way around. All right, let's move to our final section and see how this all ties together. The source material for this explainer has this fantastic metaphor for what the hymn is doing during this season. And that metaphor is a spiritual bridge. This hymn literally acts as a piece of transitional music. It's designed to walk the worshiper from one spiritual place to a completely different one. And just look at what this bridge connects. It takes us from the outward parties and celebrations of Christmas to a quieter inward devotion. It helps us shift from the general joy of the church year to the focused discipline of Lent. And maybe most importantly, it moves us from being distracted by all the lesser things in life to having a singular, focused desire for God. And it all comes down to this really beautiful divine exchange. The sober season of Septuagesima, it awakens that spiritual hunger inside of us, that restlessness we were talking about. And right when we start to feel that hunger, the hymn steps in and names the only thing that can satisfy it, the true bread, the source of all sweetness and joy. So you see, pairing this hymn with this season isn't a contradiction at all. It's a profound lesson in reordering our desires. And it leaves us with a really critical question, not just for this season, but for every single day. In a world that offers us a million temporary fixes, what is our true bread? What is the one thing that can finally, truly quiet our restless? All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to explore a really different idea of power, one that promises freedom not through our own grit and strength, but through a kind of surprising invitation that's tucked away inside a medieval hymn. Let's see what this is all about.
Everywhere you look, it's what if that's the wrong goal? I mean, what if the real path to freedom isn't about perfectly governing yourself, but about something else entirely? That question, that's really what we're digging into today.
So, to get our heads around this, we've got to look at a pretty obscure day in the church calendar. It's called Septuagesima Sunday. It kicks off the season right before Lent. Deep down belief we all have that if we just try hard enough, we can get everything right on our own.
Okay, so get this. Way before Lent comes along and asks people to focus on discipline and self-improvement, this earlier season does something, well, something more foundational. It basically forces you to confront the limits about being brutally honest, right? It asks us to just face our limitations, to admit that our own attempts to be in charge often fall short, and to recognize that a system based only on what we earn or deserve, well, that has its limits too.
So this creates a really interesting spiritual mood. It's sober, yeah, and it's realistic, but it's also expectant. It leaves you with this huge question just hanging there. If all our projects of self-mastery are bound to fail, sooner or later, where do we go from here? What's the alternative?
And you know what's amazing? The church calendar actually provides an answer, but it's not a new set of rules or a 5-step plan.
And man, it has some serious history. We're talking way back to the Cistercian monastic tradition in the 1100s. And from there, it's traveled through the centuries, eventually getting translated into English and finding a home in all sorts of Christian churches today, which really tells you something about its lasting power.
And this is where things get really interesting, because this hymn doesn't just offer a little bit of... I mean, when you hear the word king, what do you picture? Probably crowns, thrones, absolute power, all that stuff, right? Well, this hymn, it takes that whole image and just turns it completely on its head. Just think about the difference for a second. A political king, they rule by force, right? Their authority can be pretty scary. Their kingdom is an external thing. But Christ's kingship, the one in the hymn, that's all about ruling the heart through love. His authority doesn't bring fear, it brings joy. And his kingdom, it's totally spiritual, totally internal.
So when the hymn drops a line like conqueror renowned, it's so easy to misunderstand. It's not talking about armies and battles, not at all. It's talking about conquering the human heart with a love so deep that the heart...
Incredible idea. It's really the heart and soul of the hymn. It's a Latin word that captures the feeling of this unique spiritual kingdom, dulcedo. Dulcedo, it literally just means sweetness. But in this context, wow, it's so much more. It's this idea that submitting to this king isn't some grim, heavy duty. It's actually a joyful, life-giving experience. It's basically the antidote to a spirituality that just feels like a long, long list of rules you have to follow.
So this sweetness is the complete opposite of a faith built on heavy rules, you know? It's not about an obedience that's just driven by fear, and it's not just about looking good on the outside. It's all rooted in a relationship of love.
And that's what this sweet authority really does. It's not about limiting you, it's about restoring you. It doesn't crush your spirit, it actually delights it. It's an authority that somehow makes you more yourself, not less. Okay, so now we can finally put the two pieces of the puzzle together. Septuagesima throws at you, the hymn has this graceful response. The season highlights our limits. The hymn points us toward divine grace. It turns that sober, heavy mood into one that's hopeful and restorative. So what you end up with is this really clear spiritual path. Step 1, acknowledge the problem. You're not great at being your own king. Step 2, invite a different kind of ruler in. And step 3, discover yourself.
And really, that's the whole point, isn't it? The big takeaway is that real power and real freedom, it's not about controlling everything out there. According to this ancient way of thinking, it's found.
So we're going to end right back where we started, with a maybe missed something huge. Could it be that the greatest freedom we can ever know comes not from being our own king, but from joyfully serving the one who rules the heart? You know that feeling, right? You get this flash of inspiration, a totally brilliant idea, or you decide, okay, this is it, I'm starting a new habit. You feel that incredible surge of potential, and then, a few weeks later, poof, it's gone. It's just a powerful way to understand this exact problem.
It is so frustrating, isn't it? And, it's usually not because the idea was bad or that the resolution wasn't important. The real question, the one we need to ask, is about the environment it landed in. Was the ground actually ready for the seed? That's the core issue we're going to dig into.
Now, the framework behind it is absolutely timeless. It's all about the prep work. See, before you can expect anything new to grow, whether that's a spiritual insight or a personal goal, you first have to prepare the soil of your own mind and heart.
Found story from the Gospel of Luke. It's called the parable of the sower. It's this powerful metaphor that explains exactly why some of our efforts succeed in a huge way and others seem like they're just doomed from the start.
Okay, so this parable has three main players. First, you have the sower. This represents the source of the idea, the insight. In the original text, this is God's initiative. Then you have the seed. That's the powerful idea itself, the word. And finally, in hearts and minds, the moment that idea arrives. And listen, this is a really crucial point. The seed isn't just some passive piece of information. The source text describes it as something living and active. It has this built-in, inherent power to create change. But, and this is the entire point of the story, even the most powerful seed in the world can't grow in the wrong environment.
So this brings us to the diagnosis. The parable lays out 4 different types of soil, which really represent 4 different mindsets or states of the human heart. And as we go through these, I want you to think about which one might feel a little too familiar.
So here they are, the 4 types. You've got the hardened heart, the shallow heart, the distracted heart, and finally the one we're all aiming for,